even here near to us, I mean, the crisis in the Sahel, with extreme violence, with terrorism, you have a number of ingredients that give the impression that people are moving away from the ideal of UN. And that's what makes it important that the global community recommit to UN, recommit to the principle of solidarity, recommit to the principle of multilateralism. That's one aspect. But let's not forget also, as we see war ravaging different parts of the world, as we see the climate crisis driving or increasing suffering, as we see economic hardship impacting on people's life, it is time also to give much greater weight to that notion of solidarity and that notion of multilateralism. And I wanted to just say that when people look at UN, they tend to maybe focus on the Security Council and the difficulties of making decisions to stop the war. But let's not forget that there is another side of the coin, which is the humanitarian intervention, for example, for UN. I don't know how many millions of people, number of people who suffer from different form of need of humanitarian assistance has increased from 80 million to maybe 300 million in less than a decade, giving the space for humanity to express itself. And I think that's also the dimension of UN that I always want to highlight. We talk often about the meetings of the Security Council that are unable to make a decision, the meeting of the General Assembly. But let's not forget also the people who every single day, on behalf of that ideal of providing humanitarian assistance, take the risk of their life, work out of their way to reach the last people and provide them with support. Let's not forget that also within the humanity, you have communities. I was recently in Maiduguri when the flood hit. One thing that struck me most was to see the community who have nothing, but who are preparing like 2,000 hot meals per day just to come in support of those displaced people. For me, that's what I call the space where humanity is finding expression. And I think that's the space also that UN contribute to create, with its staff, with its presence in the field, but with its presence also near to the community that are the most suffering.
I mean, you just talked about that humanitarian situation that we had in Borno following the flooding. I want to be able to get you to tell us a little bit about some other interventions by the United Nations in Nigeria, ongoing and planned, let's say for this year, because we do have a situation where poverty is rife, and like you did say, many people probably look at the UN and just think of the Security Council. But let's bring it down to where we are as a people in Nigeria. What are those interventions that you have ongoing right now, and what are some of the planned interventions across the country?
Thanks for bringing more precision to the question of the humanitarian assistance. We talk about the flood because these are the recent events that we have seen. By the way, Borno was a broken dam that have created the flood, but we have seen that heavy rain, we have seen that swelling river also have created flood in different parts of the country. As we speak, we are talking about over 1.2 million people affected. And this is just the flood, but the flood is coming on top of some other hardship. Let's not forget that in the context of Borno, the states, and not only the state of Borno, but the state of Borno, Yobe, Adamawa, are going through a protracted crisis linked to the insurgency of Boko Haram. And this has been lasting for maybe the last 15 years, creating displacement of people, creating destruction of livelihood, killing people, moving people into IDP setting. All of these are suffering through which UN has been intervening. I would say that UN for the past 10 years has been supporting over 5 million people in those 3 states in different ways. It could be supply of food, it could be health support, it could be treatment of malnutrition, it could be supply of water and sanitation, which is so critical for the well-being of the people. But I just wanted to add that unfortunately, when we talk about suffering and hardship, it's mostly seen probably in the northeast, but let's not forget that also the northwest of the countries is going through difficult through challenges. We have seen the banditry, we have seen sometimes the rising insecurity, how it's impacting not only the people's life, but their livelihood also. We have seen intercommunal violence, sometimes herders and farmers, leading to massive displacement, leading to massive loss of livelihood and life. We have seen in different parts of the country, hotspot and pocket, where insecurity is impacting deeply on people's life. UN engagement in those kind of situations is twofold. One is how to race against time to save people's life, reduce their vulnerability, enhance the protection, mainly the protection of the most vulnerable, the women, the children, the elderly, people living with disability. But the other aspect of UN work also is how to address the root causes of those crises. Because no crisis comes exacerbated like we see it. It always comes on top of deficit of access to service, deficit of development, prolonged or deep poverty, inequalities. UN works also through the Sustainable Development Goal into development processes that can also, in a longer term, or address those kind of situations.
You've played pivotal roles in post-disaster scenarios globally. Now, for Maiduguri, which you've been, and the thing is, there are people who may have moved on from Maiduguri because the medium or platform that they get their information from might have moved on. So they might not have the proper picture of what's going on there. So could you just tell us who needs to do what in Maiduguri to make sure that at least those issues are addressed? Because something has been addressed.
Yes, but I think it's a partnership. I think the leading role has to be taken by the state. What I call the state, the Executive Council of Borno, and we have seen the Governor Zulum showing outstanding leadership in guiding the response in the immediate aftermath of the flood. But I think prior to that, we have seen also the state taking a leading role in settling the crisis that the state is facing for more than 15 years now. And I can talk largely about it. When I came to Nigeria first, like 2015-16, number of local government area in Borno State was under the control of the insurgency. But if you look at from that time to today, those 10 years, you have seen that peace has progressed, security has progressed, the control of government is now in the entire state. Those are progress that I should highlight coming from the leadership of the government. But it's not only the government, it's also the security forces, it is the civil society, it's the local organization. I referred earlier to the solidarity and the generosity shown by the community. It's the international partner, but it's also the private sector. Including when the recent flood happened, you have seen so many philanthropists, so many private sector leaders who step in and provided support. And I feel that the kind of challenge we have today doesn't have boundary and is not limited to the responsibility of the state. The international community come in support of the state, but the support is also building on forces like the community, like the civil society, like the private sector. Every segment of society have part in the response that need to be given to those people.
I mean, looking at the situation on ground, you did mention the number of people that interventions are trying to reach or reaching already in Nigeria. We do have a peculiar problem. We have rising inflation. There's a poverty level that is increasing. There's crime and criminality that is on the rise as well. Do you think that we're going to have a worse humanitarian situation, let's say in the next year or so? Because for many people, we just feel like things are about to get worse. So the country is in a lot of trouble. How are we going to handle everything when it comes to a head? Do you see a future where we have bigger humanitarian issues in Nigeria?
It's difficult for me to predict what the situation will be 1 year down the line. But what I can say is that the factor that triggered the humanitarian needs and the humanitarian or the human suffering, there are several fold. Conflict security is something that we have spoken about. I mentioned earlier the climate crisis. You have seen now, land degradation, heat wave, flood, drought. You have seen the Lake Chad shrinking, and those aspects of the climate and the environment degradation could also be a leading factor. Of course, the economy is also something that needs to be fixed. And I believe that being in my position and engaging with different segments of the international community, we are all happy about the bold reform that was taken by the government of Nigeria, mainly the new administration, by trying to fix the macroeconomy, because this is what will create a conducive conditions for a development of the country. But what happened is that those measures have ripple effect that was not controlled in terms of, for example, inflation or in terms of rise of food prices. And those need to be addressed. And we are, as UN, working with the government to support them through a kind of direct payment program they have. Some call it cash transfer. And I feel that if that program is scaled up, if that program is target well those who are most suffering currently, this could be a kind of mitigation way as we wait for maybe the result of the reform that are already undertaken. Now, how this will evolve in the month and the week to come, most economists believe that by the time we reach the end of the year and early next year, you will see the inflation coming down. We will see maybe food prices coming down. And I feel that if this is combined with some of the social mitigation measures, this will maybe improve the situation of the people. As we also look at the climate-related crisis or some other form of crisis, I think also preparedness is important. Because what are the cause of the flood? Most of the time, it's people are settled in places that are prone to flood. Most of the time, it's maybe an issue of maintaining the infrastructure that regulates the water system. Most of the time, it is also setting up a system that helps to, one, on time, the people so that they can move away from the place where the disaster takes place. And all of these things are processes in which we are working with the government of Nigeria, both at federal and state level.
So tell us, what are the challenges that maybe UN and maybe your partners face in ensuring that you address some of these problems, these challenges adequately?
Let's say the challenges are several-fold. You have some that are linked to access to people who need our support. Okay. Let's say if you have a security challenges and or a security impediment that does not allow you or your staff or your partner to reach the hardest to reach, that's a challenge. I think improving access in this regard is important. I see also funding becoming a problem because, let's face it, I mean, the world is facing unprecedented time in terms of humanitarian assistance need. You look at Gaza today or Lebanon, those two places can absorb the entire resources that the international community mobilized for humanitarian assistance, not to mention Ukraine or Sudan. And in this very competing environment, making the case and attractive funding for a country like Nigeria become more and more difficult. And we have seen year by year our humanitarian assistance funding, our humanitarian response appeal funding shrinking and going down. We have launched a lean season plan to race against malnutrition of children and food insecurity for this current lean season. And we have seen that it was 306 million that we have appealed for. I think until recently, we have not even reached 35% of funding. And the humanitarian response plan must be around 40% funding. And this is mirroring the global trend we have seen. Globally speaking, I don't think the humanitarian appeal for the world have reached 40% funding, and we are almost 3 years before the end of the year. I think funding become also another issue which is an impediment to our appropriate or adequate response to the humanitarian need.
I mean, interventions, are supposed to be temporary. They're not supposed to be a way of life. Countries cannot survive on interventions, right? At some point, you have to look within and transition to a country where people are doing well, as opposed to always expecting help. And I noticed over the years that the UN keeps giving help. in many, especially in the Northeast. Let's look at that right now. Would you look at that situation over the years? You've been here for quite a bit, you know, working with UNICEF and now as resident coordinator for the UN. Is there progress being made?
Indeed, progress has been made. But that's why in the beginning I was saying that the UN support should be seen with a kind of twofold approach. The first one is how you race against time to save life. When, for example, there is a disease outbreak, there is a flood, there is a massive displacement due to conflict or insecurity, the people most urgent need is to survive. Mainly the survival of the most vulnerable, which I mentioned earlier. Then you have to look at the root causes of what brought this fragility.
In your view, are those root causes being addressed?
This is what I was going to come to. They are being addressed by looking at development and medium and longer term development process.
Okay.
By looking at what the root causes of this fragility are. By looking at what kind of planning process should put on track these community, these state, these people toward achieving development goal. And that's what the Sustainable Development Goal is about. The global community have adopted them in 2015 for 2030 to reach zero hunger, to reach universal access to health, to reach universal access to water and sanitation, to education, you name it. But those were goals that was set for putting the countries and the communities and the society in the path to development. But as you get into this, sometimes you are interrupted by events or by incidents that need to be addressed also. And that's the whole notion of agility that we put in our approach. Because as you are trying to address root causes toward longer term development, sometimes you are interrupted. Like, for example, in Borno State, we have launched the State Plan for Durable Solution, which was to stop the pouring humanitarian resources without looking at the root causes of underdevelopment. And as we launched them in May, and by the way, Nigeria was the first country to launch those state plan out of an initiative of 15 countries that the Secretary General of UN took for a durable solution for displaced people. As we started that process with the commitment of the government, with the commitment of the private sector, with the mobilization of the bilateral and the international financial institution, then we got the flood that hit us. Of course, it could trigger a setback because it took us back to humanitarian assistance, but we did it in a way that it was just a bracket of few weeks, and then we go back to the process of building medium and longer term development through this durable solution.
Well, clearly, I mean, we all have a role to play. Media, government, private sector, to support issues like this, for which UN and humanitarian agencies are all there for. So we have to thank you for coming on, and we do hope that whatever time, whenever we can, we will always contribute a lot to make sure we contribute to the humanitarian work of the UN. So thank you, Mr. Fall, for coming this morning.
Thank you very much. And if you allow me, I will end with one word by just calling the media our allies. Because I think whatever we do need to be known. Whatever we do need mobilization. Whatever we do need the information to reach the last mile. And I think there is no one who can do it better than the media. That's why I say that if we have one critical ally in our endeavor, in our work, it's the media. And that's why I'm happy also to be given this opportunity to be part of your program. Thank you.
And we're glad to have you on anytime.
Thanks.
All right, so there you go. That is the show today. We do thank you all for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm Chamberlain Osop. Goodbye.
Have a great day ahead. I'm Kayla Megwa.